Question. In your opinion, is welfare helping or hurting the community? Debating team from Princeton is for welfare. My brother, sorry, Hassan's Kirby, my man, Delonte Bass, is against welfare. Now, in your opinion, brother, Hassan's Kirby, what do you think? Is it hurting our community? Why do you think it's hurting our community?
I believe that welfare hurts our community because it's not given like it was initially formulated. Welfare was given to some of the more wealthier people at one time, and it was given to them for an educational stipend. It wasn't given to them to be as it is in our community now. Okay, once you have a baby, you're going to be on welfare, no work and everything. So I believe welfare hurts our community because it makes us become dependent on something that was initially that wasn't for us.
In your opinion, why do you think welfare is good for our community?
So I think that the question is not, is the current system of welfare good, but can welfare help the community? And I think that in this situation, I think that looking at historical trends, we've generally been very opposed to communities in which people are left to die out in the streets, where people don't have health care in order to survive. And so it's clear that there is some form of government role that is necessary to correct these economic results, which could see very drastic poverty. And I think that welfare is necessary as some sort of correcting device, but as they exist today, it may be going too far.
Okay.
Well, the reason why I'm against welfare is because it's costing the taxpayers a lot of money. And the thing about it, when you talk about welfare, we have to define what is welfare. When you bail out corporations, that's welfare. When you give to these when you ship money overseas to help Israel, that's a form of welfare. So in other words, we're losing taxpayers' monies to help people, and the money is not trickling down. Then also, like he mentioned, the point of it's not teaching people how to stand up for themselves, that old American mentality. Pull up your bootstraps, work hard. You know, it's making people become complacent upon the system. So when I think of welfare, I don't just think of the typical getting a check once a month. I'm thinking of, even when it comes to farmers, a lot of farmers, they get a welfare check. That's why their products are low, whatever. If you eliminate welfare from the farming industry, you'll see a change in the farming industry. You'll begin to see more organic products hit the market at a cheaper rate, because no longer is the government subsidizing them. So when we talk about welfare, all that is welfare. Anything that the government steps in and gives a major check to a corporation, that's welfare. Remember the movie Too Big to Fail? What happened? They gave them this large check and none of it trickled down. So in other words, you know, I'm not for welfare. Because if that's the situation, no, I'm totally against it.
I would have to disagree with your view on what welfare is. Like, I think a lot of the situations you described tend to be subsidies. It's not like any time there's an economic transaction between the government and some kind of party, that's necessarily welfare. For me, when I think of welfare, I think of food stamps. I think of like a safety net for the poor. I think of like when people fall into frictional unemployment, to prevent them from falling into long-term employment, you have the safety net and welfare. And because of that, I think like welfare is extremely helpful for the community. It's true that we're using the taxpayers' money, but you need to think of this like kind of reciprocal relationship. Like, you pay taxes right now for a welfare system that might help other people, but should you fall on hard times, this welfare system is likewise extended to you. And thus it's like you kind of like that kind of social contract works up there. I think it's like a fair trade in that way. Like, maybe you don't get the benefits right now, but at some point in the future, at your hardest moment in time, the government should be there to help you. And in terms of like making you complacent and this American idea of like independence, I agree that sometimes there are welfare scroungers or like welfare can lead to some form of dependency, but I think the level or extent of welfare can be adjusted so that it's enough to offer some sort of safety net, but not so enough, let's say you want to buy a new car or have like other material luxuries, you still have the incentive to find a job. And I think like sometimes we can make the welfare system conditional on the idea like you have to be actively looking for a job or have to show like you're doing something about your situation to deserve the welfare that you currently get.
You said safety net for the poor.
Yeah.
Safety net for the poor. The poor don't need a safety net. They're already poor. What do you need a safety net for?
They already hit rock bottom already?
What do you need a safety net for? Excuse me, but that one stuck out the most. When you say that food stamps and a safety net for the poor, when it is a fact that more people in suburban areas receive welfare twice as much more than people in poor districts, in poor areas. So who is this? So there's a safety net for the rich too?
That's a good question.
So you're disagreeing with the way the current welfare system works, but you're not fundamentally disagreeing with this idea of like giving money to people when they need it. So what if the welfare system worked so that the safety net was more for like poor areas rather than for suburban areas? Like, would you disagree with that still?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, a point you mentioned, you said subsidy, right?
Yeah.
When you talk about anything, corporations, all that, when you talk about welfare, even for the poor, they call that subsidy also. When you talk about giving a large check to these corporations, that's subsidy also. They're one and the same. Only thing what happens is they try to make us believe it's different. And the reason why they do that so the rich or the wealthy can justify why they're getting this check. But when you talk to the actual poor person, the actual person says, that's still welfare. So and then when you look at the amount that is given versus what you say the poor people versus the rich, the reason why I'm against it, because when you look at $1 billion, it may be 800 million go to the rich and 200 to the poor. And the situation of poor people don't change. So if that's the case, we might as well just eliminate it, because the only people benefiting is the rich people. And that's what you see constantly over and over and over again. So if that is the case, that's another way of the rich get richer and the poor get poor. So my thing is just eliminate it in general and even the playing field, and you will see things change.
So it seems like what we've just done is we've characterized food stamps, foreign aid, agricultural subsidies, and financial bailouts all under this giant umbrella of welfare. So going by this definition, it seems like every single time the government spends a penny on anything, we're going to be calling it welfare because somebody must be getting that. So I think that the problem with this definition is it's just way too broad. Surely the government has some role in spending money, because that's why it exists in the first case, right? The government needs to be spending money to, say, defense manufacturers because it needs to be setting up a military. It needs to be spending money on, say, road builders because otherwise we're not going to have roads. So there is some role that the government needs to play in the economy, otherwise vital services will not appear. And I do strongly disagree with your contention that welfare fundamentally is making the wealthier people wealthy and the poorest people more poor. If you look at the way our tax system is set up, currently I think approximately 50% of the population, perhaps less, does not pay a net amount of taxes. So they might pay taxes, but they get more in terms of tax receipts. So I think that the way it's set up, you have a lot of people who are not really paying into the system, but who are definitely receiving services out of it. So it's hard to conceive that this would actually be making the poor people poorer than they otherwise would have been. I think that there are a lot of arguments in favor of economic inequality, but to argue that welfare is actually a driver of economic inequality seems to be going a little bit far.
I wouldn't say it's a driver, but I would say it's a factor. And then when you talk about aid, you said aid. Now, if you're talking about aid for infrastructure, that's one thing. But there was the thing, laissez-faire. That means you let government and business is separated. When the government starts to interfere in business and start to invest in business, That is welfare.
That's welfare at its highest.
Yes, that's just welfare, simple and plain. Now, if you want to say business, then the government should stay out of business and let business handle business. But they don't do that, because when you talk about war, when you talk about all this, it's all business. When you talk about them giving aid, it's to keep a certain group of people rich. So once you see that, you begin to say, you know what, this is, to me, is another scam.
I think it's true that there are corporate interests that are influencing how government works, but this doesn't mean that we can have a complete separation of government and the private sector. There are certain services that the government needs to pay for because it's the only person that, because these are public goods that only government, like defense, that only government can pay for them. But it doesn't mean that the government is in a position to administer and manufacture these goods, right? The government is not well equipped to design fighter jets. So you need business involvement in government endeavors. You need the government to be hiring a company to build those fighter jets. We can't have the Defense Department hiring contractors or hiring civilians to do that.
But you're saying there shouldn't be or should be a separation between government and business.
So I think in terms of like the separation or not, I think if you completely, it's like unfathomable to completely separate the government.
Why?
And
They
business.
separate church and state?
I think like you separate it to the extent in terms of like a kind of non-interference, but when you see like, let's say, religion overstepping its boundaries in terms of like, for certain religions, I guess, like for very fundamentalist Mormons, when they like engaged in polygamy, like the government stepped in and said that was like not okay. So we do see like they do interact. It's not like they're completely separate. It's just like, I think our side can like argue for government and like corporation interactions. It's just like within those interactions there are like good things and bad things, right? Like sometimes they interact in a way that's like very corrupt, but sometimes they interact in a way that makes like each other more efficient, right? Like you can't always have the public sector doing certain like manufacturing things because the private sector just does it better in terms of incentives. Likewise, you do need the public sector, like the government sometimes to intervene in companies to like pass legislation that restricts certain benefits that solely benefit the richest within companies. So I think in its best form, it can work for everyone, but obviously in its worst form, there are like cons to it. But to say like they don't have any interactions whatsoever, I've like find it difficult to conceive of what that world would look like.
Anybody want to comment off of what she just said?
No, I didn't disagree with that.
She laid it down too much.
Well,
She laid it down for you. Okay, we're gonna go to the next question. We're gonna talk about unemployment. When it comes to unemployment, do you think they should shorten unemployment or give it an extension? I think you should be for unemployment, and I think this side should be against unemployment. In your opinion, do you think they should shorten when somebody gets fired or laid off from their job? So you think they should be shortened into like a 6 months period, or in more extent for like a year?
I think unemployment should be extended based on different people's circumstances and situations, because losing a job can be devastating. Everyone cannot rebound quickly after losing a job. You have mental factors and things to factor into here. Someone may lose their job and get totally depressed, where they may not come out of that depressed state in 6 months. It may take them a little longer, so the unemployment should be extended. I think it should be extended on a case-by-case basis.
What do you think?
Well, unemployment should be extended because when you look at the factors of how long it's taking people to get a job, and the average person, they usually be out of work now anywhere from 6 months to a year. You know, people are not finding jobs as readily as anymore. So sometimes you have to increase the time limit to cover that process that's happening now. Because a lot of jobs going overseas, some jobs they're not paying as much. So sometimes people have to take more than one job. And the thing I would say why it should be extended, because also it allows certain people to go back to school to get a better education so they can get a better job and be more productive in society. As soon as 6 months happen, what happens if you still didn't find any employment? Now we have a greater situation still. So for me, I would extend unemployment longer because, and you know, based on what really happens when you're on unemployment, what really sometimes they'll start your thing, it's supposed to start then, you may don't get a check till a month or 2 months later, but they still got you saying for 6 months. So now you kind of fell behind in your bills because of that. And also, it's your money. If you paid into it, why can't I get my money back?
Ms. Wayne, would you like to comment?
Sure. Okay, so on to the first thing, like, I think when you're talking about bills, I'm glad you brought that up. You're talking about water, gas, like your children's like school fees and stuff. So I think the longer you spend in unemployment and like even frictional unemployment, the more likely it's going to last into like longer term unemployment in which you have to fall back on the welfare system and a safety net. Like we're saying that the safety net is important, but we're trying to get people off it as much as possible. And I think what happens when you are unemployed for such a long period of time and you have these bills going up, your credit ratings go down. And a lot of these like companies that lend you money or like banks or stuff can be quite predatory about it. And when your credit ratings go down, it becomes harder for you to like borrow money or to start up something new, right? So I think I think employment, even if it's like paying you less than what you originally would have earned, is better than no employment whatsoever, because then you at least can like pay back some of those things. Your credit ratings don't drop as much, and so you're on a better foothold to get back into the work, like your proper workforce, like commensurate to your ability in the long run. And then in addition to that, in terms of like the economy, I think when more people are unemployed for longer periods of time, they tend to save more or spend less, and in general the economy tends to slow down. Like I think if every person gets like $1 extra because of they're like more likely to be employed, etc., they're more likely to spend that and to like boost up the economy and get it running.
Anybody would like to comment off what Ms. Wayne said?
Yes, because she has this thing with safety nets. I don't know where is going to be a safety net when I'm unemployed and I need that extension to get my mind right. I've been working for this damn company for like 7 years. I put my blood, sweat, and tears in this company. And then for them to fire me, it devastated me. I'm used to making sure my kids got the finest of things, making sure every bill is paid, making sure there's food in my house. Now for them to fire me, you think I could just get up and go to some less paying job and still be sane? I'm about to lose my mind right now because I don't have my job. and then unemployment playing games, so they should extend it. They should extend it so I can go get some type of psychological help too. That's
I think that what this comes down to is the role of government. Is government's job to be a temporary support for people who are in a situation of duress, or is government going to step in instead of people having to take up their own personal responsibility? I think in a situation like now where you can be on unemployment insurance for about 2 years, 2 years is enough to get an associate's degree. You can get training in that period of time. To suggest that we want it to be even longer, like what's next? Unlimited unemployment insurance where you can just sit around and do nothing forever.
That's a good idea. And we need to lobby the Congress for unlimited unemployment. Not only can I get a degree, I get paid some money while I'm getting my degree, and I won't be crazy is all I'm doing.
and here are the practical implications of that, right? We've got a pretty big underground economy in the United States. Businesses that work under the table. And imagine let's say you get a certain amount of money per year through unemployment insurance. You get a certain amount of money per year because you're working in the underground economy, right? If you add those two together, that might be more than a job that you would be getting that would be declared. But people won't be getting that job because they know even if that job pays more than what they're getting under the table, they won't be getting that because otherwise they lose their unemployment insurance. So what we're doing is in certain situations where we have people at the margin, right, where it's, am I really going to sacrifice am I really going to get this higher paying job, but I'm going to be losing money because I'm losing unemployment insurance. Then you're stopping people from entering the legal workforce, and you're keeping people in the shadows. You're stopping people from paying taxes, and you're hurting the economy in the long run.
That's
I'm not stopping them. I'm not stopping them. I think unemployment insurance still should be extended because it's numerous circumstances that surround those type of things. I hear what you say about the government and you don't want people to become too dependent on it, but some people need it. I need the extra extension of unemployment.
See,
So
it's not a
extending.
clear-cut answer, but when you talk about this issue, you say extended longer than 6 months. I say, okay, I'm agreeing with that. A year. In other words, because sometimes it takes longer to find a job, because also you have to look at the background of the individual. For example, you can't say get any job. If this person has a PhD, has this, he go apply for jobs, he's told he's overqualified.
Exactly.
Because the likelihood of he doing that job, he will like, what is this? So he'll quit. So sometime he may need a longer time period to find a job. And the reason being because the higher level the job is, you don't get hired like that. When you talk about professional jobs, you may have to go on 3-4 interviews. You may have to go on 3-4 interviews, and they be 2-3 weeks apart. So sometime within that time period, 6 months may have passed already. And then on top of that, when you collect unemployment, they make you go to classes. They make you do all that. I have nothing against that. But what I'm talking about is the time period. Is like 6 months go by like that. So in other words, all I'm saying is, yes, it should be extended to a year. I'm not saying 2 years. No, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying 2. All I'm saying is a year is an adequate time for me. Now, I'm not going overboard and be like, yeah, 2 years, 3 years. No, no one should be on it like that. But a year is a good enough time to get yourself together. And also, you know, make certain decisions. In case you make a mistake, you can pick it back up. And also, that's why I say, yes, it should be extended, you know, because if I don't know if you ever was on unemployment, those first couple of months is real hard and difficult, even as far as the paperwork process when it comes to unemployment. So sometimes some people be trapped like, yo, they ain't send me a check yet. They ain't send me this yet. And by the time, but on the paper, it says their date was this day. So before you know it, by the time they get a check, it's a month and a half later. But you're saying 6 months, whatever, like that. So some of the hardships, unemployment need to be revamped. I agree with that, like, and how the process, how it's selected. But I really feel it should be an extension to unemployment.
Would anybody like to comment against?
Yeah, I would. So I think one thing that both of you guys brought up is like kind of the emotional like struggles after like losing your job and stuff, right? So I think, but for certain people, they might feel it really fulfilling to be employed as quickly as possible, even if they're overqualified for their job, because they want to keep their days busy. They feel like just more existentially more fulfilled when they have a job. And I think like it's important to cater to those people as well, because in a lot of cases, sure, they might deserve a more like a higher job in which that's like better matches their abilities and qualities, but I think they can also look for that job at the same time as being employed at perhaps a lesser paying job. I don't see them as necessarily being mutually conflicting, and especially when you're talking about taxpayers' money in this case, like that's the kind of trade-off you'd make. Every month extra, you'd keep this person in unemployment and trying to help them. It's like another month of taxpayers' money when it's not necessary. I think like what little benefits they could get and perhaps like emotional fulfillment from a different job might be useful. And I also think it's like perhaps it would open up different doors that you wouldn't have considered originally by trying to look for different types of jobs that you just might not have gone for it had you always been employed at the same company.
Now, you said taxpayers' money.
Yeah.
Everybody know you pay into unemployment. So in other words, if I was at this company for 20 years, it's not your money. I paid the 20. I paid. It's just my own money I paid into. So it's not taxpayers' money. It's my money. So when you talk about if I'm there 6 months or a year, I paid it. It's like someone paying for a RA account or this account or paid into his pension or her pension. You paid into that. It's no different from how people are paying into their pension right now, and the government is using people's pension money to invest in other things. Now when it come back, you have no pension. It's the same thing for unemployment's happening. People paid millions into unemployment. Now they saying, no, we're going to cut. Why? Because behind closed doors, they'll take that same money and invest it somewhere else. The money that you worked hard for, that you paid into. If that was the case, if they're going to just give me 6 months, then after 6 months of work, then I should be able to say, all right, the money that you was investing in unemployment should come back into my paycheck. That's how it should be done if you're going to put me on a restriction.
Exactly.
And that's how it is. So it's not a taxpayer's thing, you know. It's your own money. That's all I have to say about that.
Right. We're going to move on to the next question. We're going to talk about our houses. Us as Americans, do we ever really own property, our homes, our houses, if we don't pay taxes? Now, I mean, I'm going to get this side right here. Y'all going to be for it, and you're going to be against it.
So we're saying
Wait,
they do own
you have to
property,
phrase
or-
that like, what you mean? Like, do we?
Basically, it's saying like, once you own a house, and then after, the taxes,
No,
like,
the question is, do you own a house?
Basically, like you said, do you ever own a house? I was about to go on a long one,
Who is this,
but
the
do you ever,
producer?
in your opinion, do you ever own a house?
And we say
Well, we still on the money and taxes thing. Wait,
That's the money and
I mean,
taxes.
we basically still stay in the circle of the same kind of debates, though.
What with the economy? That's part of the economy, though.
Yeah,
You want to get off the economy
Are
already?
you talking about the importance of home ownership?
Yeah, basically, property, owning property. That's all of the economy.
Wait, so are we
You
saying,
ready to get off? What you
Wait, no. You recording this right now?
No.
Oh,
I am.
oh, okay. Well,
Yeah.
see, your question, I'm a little like,
Skeptic about it?
no, not skeptic. It's like,
It's
are
not
you
clear.
saying? Yeah, it's not clear. What are you saying? Is it
No,
important to own a home?
Okay,
or
maybe
it's not
you know what?
important?
Maybe it was maybe off my No, not saying it was better to own a home. I'm saying like basically like like people own a house and you
Yeah.
work years, 20, 30 years owning a house.
What's the
Then
question?
after that-
What is the question? Just keep it simple.
Yeah, that's basically the question. Do you really own a house? Do you really own your property in America?
Okay, that's
okay, and you're saying
Well, that's what I was.
saying.
Well, I was talking about me myself, but
I don't know what's going to take on that.
so
one,
so
because
so do y'all want to take? Do you believe that
No, it's not what you believe. It's you pick a side.
right?
It's not
all
what
right,
you
well, all right.
believe.
I'm
Why
just
don't
giving.
you guys
Okay, I'm just gonna give it to
decide?
you. I'm just gonna give it to you now.
Right.
Honestly, you don't never really own
Own
your
the
house.
home.
Okay,
unless
it's okay.
All right, so we're gonna
you
say
with
that you
it.
do own your
So you with it and you're not with it. That's basically what I'm saying.
You own your house? I don't know.
okay.
we say you own your house.
Why did you pay
You
taxes?
y'all believe y'all never
No,
own your own
no.
property and
You still
you
gotta
believe
pay
that
taxes.
Yeah, okay.
We're saying
So
that
you
Don't
never
say you
own.
believe.
You never own it because you
saying
still got to pay property
We're saying
taxes
okay, you
or
own it
something.
regardless.
Do you
okay.
feel that you
No.
own?
Even y'all,
What side do you want to take?
No, that's the
Ownership.
They're taking that side. It's not what you believe, what you
gotta go
feel.
first.
Right.
I
You're
didn't think
debating
about
a
this.
side.
Right,
even
okay.
you
Whether
like,
you feel that way or not.
I don't really know.
Yeah, I'm still in the same old.
But say
So I'm
sorry,
saying,
but
you know what? Wait, you said you don't really understand or know?
Oh, no,
He
it's
got
okay.
it down, so
I
see-
like just need
No,
to
no,
know
we're
that.
We're going to set it down.
Oh.
Yeah, I
You
forgot.
understand?
Okay, okay.
He
Yeah.
ready.
Carolyn, you see
Okay.
All right.
3,
Amen.
2, 1.
When it comes to property, do you really own property after putting in for like 30, 20 years after working? Brother Hassan, what do you believe?
No. It's never your property because you're still going to have to pay some type of taxes, whether it's property taxes or homeowners insurance. You're going to have to pay something, so you never really own it. Ownership means like this pen right here I have in my hand, I own this pen. I
Exactly.
put it in my pocket. I don't got to pay another
That
thing
shit
for this
belongs
pen.
to Princeton.
Oh, yeah. that's-
Thank you. I guess I own that pen.
What do you believe, Theodore?
So I think that here the question is about the meaning of ownership. What does
Right.
it mean to
Right.
own something?
Exactly.
So I think that what it means to own a property is to be able to have certain rights on that property that other people don't have. So you have the right to sell it to somebody. You have the right to modify that property to suit your convenience. You have the right to rent that property and get things from it. But as Kirby points out here, there are limits to ownership. And here it's more about the role of government, the extent of intrusiveness that government can have, than about whether or not you still whether you still own it, right? The government is allowed to tax the land that you have. The government is allowed to tax the revenue that you get from that land. But that doesn't mean that you don't own it anymore. For example, you could be working and the government is taxing your personal activity. One could argue that basically government is taxing your life. Does that mean that you don't own your life, you don't own your existence? Here we're getting into these very metaphysical debates. And I think that ownership of something is absolute, and it is not predicated on legislation. It is not predicated on government law, on government action. It is a natural right.
I disagree, because you don't even have a right to sell your house without getting authorization from your county or from the courts. You can't even modify your house without certain code enforcement, so you still don't even own the right to do what you want to your house.
But the reason for this is because of zoning covenants that are set by people. And what happens is people get together to protect the value of their own property. And so the reason why there are these laws in place is to protect your own property in the first place. So it's really an extension of you exercising ownership of your property and of you exercising the interests that are derived from the ownership of your property. And so the reason, and so here again, it's not that the ownership is predicated on that. It's that you are setting up these, you as a citizen are setting up these regulations to protect your interests.
How are you protecting your interests on something that you own?
By making sure, for example, if you live in a residential neighborhood, that your neighbor doesn't build a shopping mall on his property, and that's going to, keep your entire block completely congested.
It's his property.
But
it's your property.
But just as he has an interest in protecting his own value, so do you.
It's my property. Why would you be worried about me building something on my property? I own it. You own your home. You just said you have a right to sell it. You have a right to modify and do what you want on yours. So I shouldn't be concerned, but you're concerned about mine. So you will sit around with someone and make up a law and legislation to keep me from building on my property, and then you're going to say you own yours.
But all rights have limits, right? So we can make laws that can stop people from going around shooting each other or stop people from going around stealing. We can have pretty radical restrictions on personal behavior that stop people from doing just whatever they'd like to do in their spare time. But that doesn't mean that we're now saying that we are now pawns of the government and creatures of the state. There's still some sort of separation there.
Like, for example, I can't shout fire in a theater. I'd get arrested for that, or like get off with like a warning, right? But doesn't mean I don't have freedom of speech in this country. Like Theo said, like a lot of these property rights don't exist in a vacuum. I think like ownership rights are extended insofar as they can be best maximized when they stop conflicting with other people's ownership rights. Like that is the extent of it. That's why we have a lot of these codified procedures and legislation to make sure we better protect ownership rights. Sometimes to better protect the whole or entirety of ownership rights, you need to limit certain parts of it, but that's the best way to protect other people's ownership rights as well. So in the entire system, you maximize like ownership of your property. And I think even in the most extreme cases where you might think you don't have ownership, like let's say eminent domain, where the government like seizes your land, first of all, they can't do this unjustifiably. And if it really was the case that you had no ownership claim or whatever, the government would just take your land and like that's it. But the thing is, the government can't just do that. They have to compensate you with like the market value of the land that they take. So because there's like a reciprocal relationship in terms of like compensation, they have to deal with all this like legal frameworks and stuff. It shows like they do respect ownership rights and they recognize that you have ownership of this land.
Now, you said the government. What do you call what happened to the indigenous Americans? The Indians. Even right now they're having battles where the government just coming in and moving them off their land, which is their property, their land. And then when you talk about home ownership, if you have a mortgage, you definitely do not own your land. The bank owns your land. Until you fully pay the mortgage off, which in turn you're really paying 2-3 times what the house is worth, and you only own the house itself. See, when we gotta put things in clear perspective, like you don't own the actual land that the house sits on. You own the house, but not the land. And so that's why they can keep taxing you and keep taxing you. When you talk about the indigenous people, the Americans, the Native Americans, they actually own the land. So they build and do whatever they want. We do not own the land. And so when you talk about eminent domain, there's even cases in urban areas, urban cities, where the government just came in and took the land from the people and did not give them property value or the true value assessment of the house. Because they say the government, if it's for a certain infrastructure projects like highways and schools, they can come in and use eminent domain. So if whether I'm against it or with it, say like I may be against, no, this is my house, I've been in my family 20 years. There's nothing I can do about it. They can come in and say, sorry, eminent domain. If it's my land or my home, that law should not apply at all. But why is it applying? Because it shows you really don't own it. There's a thing called illusion. And what happens, we have a lot of illusion in America that make us believe we have something, but we don't. It's like a magician. That's why it's like Hollywood. What they call the American dream, but it's a dream. It didn't say reality. The American reality is, no, we really don't own anything. What happens is when the government says we want this, they take it. But so far as like home ownership, even without going that deep and philosophical, metaphysical, whatever you said, until I pay off that mortgage, is the bank-owned property. And 9 times out of 10, the average person does not pay the mortgage off. They be paying 30, 40 years. And as soon as you slip on the mortgage payment, they come and take your house. After 2-3 payments, it goes up in foreclosure, whatever it may be. So I would say, no, you don't own your land. Before we even get deep, are we talking about people that paid the house off? Like, that's the, you know, sometimes we got to have that discussion. Are you talking about someone who paid the whole mortgage off or someone who's still paying the mortgage? Because they are in 2 different brackets now. Even what they can do with the land or with the house. If my house is paid in full, it allows me to do certain things versus someone house who still has a mortgage, you know? So that's another thing when we talk about this, when I say a lot of things not black and white or clear cut, you know? So when we talk about, do you own your home? If you're paying a mortgage, no, you don't own your home. That's the end of it.
You don't own your
home. You don't own your home.
Taxes.
And then you talk about taxes, putting liens, water taxes. That's what you're paying for, is the resources that the city is providing. But long as you're paying taxes, that means the government or somebody has a hand in your business. Some shape, form, or fashion. Because when we talk about taxes, a lot of times we throw out taxes. Really, you're not supposed to pay taxes. Taxes, we pay the IRS. IRS is a private corporation. Just like the post office is a private corporation. And these people, they set up the system where they always benefit. Why nobody ain't taxing the IRS?
Because they own it.
Yeah, why they don't get taxed? Like, nobody never taxed the IRS. How much tax do the post office pay? How much tax is easy? But they always taxing us and saying we own this, we own that. If I feel as though we own this, own that, I shouldn't be paying any taxes whatsoever. But before we even debate, it's about mortgage. Did you pay the mortgage up in
Anybody
full?
disagree with Mr. Marsaya?
I think that there are some really interesting points you made. So first of all, start with the Native Americans. It is true that we stole a lot of their land. But what we have to deal with here is sort of a statute of limitations, right? So the people who have been injured in here are the descendants many, many generations of people were actually injured, and the people would be expected, so who's going to pay it back, right? People whose parents immigrated here in the 1920s, so whose families weren't even in America. You can't have just one random group of people who are defined by the fact that their ancestors were not Native Americans be forced to compensate for another group of people and to compensate everything that was done to the Native Americans. So the practicality there just doesn't work out. So next we have the question of, you were saying you just own your house but not the land. The fact is the US is one of the few countries where you do own the land in addition to the house. That's why, for example, in most countries, if they discover oil under your property, then the government is allowed, it belongs to the government. In the US, it belongs to you. So this is actually a particularity about the American system. And then finally, your arguments about eminent domain and mortgages in general. So the fact that if you did not own your property, then the government would not be required to compensate you for eminent domain because it would belong to them. So the very fact that you are forced to be reimbursed demonstrates that you own it. Now, yes, it's true, the government probably exercises it more than it can. There are a lot of abuses, especially in the criminal justice system, where the prosecution will seize your property as leverage. But that, I don't think, is particularly part of this debate. That's more about overstepping property rights than about the existence of property rights. And then finally, with mortgages, there again, you still own your property. It's your decision to have borrowed money from a bank in order to purchase a property. But the property is still yours. It's you who are voluntarily using that property that you own as a security against the loan that you made. You weren't forced to do that. The bank wasn't forced to borrow to lend it to you. So it's just a voluntary contract that you entered. And the fact that you are allowed to use your house as a mortgage against the sum that you borrowed proves that you own it, because otherwise you wouldn't be allowed to do that.
Yeah.
Well, hold on, first you start off with the Native Americans, right?
Hot debate, y'all.
Now you said the answer, you shouldn't have to, we shouldn't be, the next generation should not be allowed or take the wrath of paying back them, right? Paying back the Native Americans. That's what you were saying? What do you mean pay? If it's my land to begin with, you took it from me.
But if you never lived on that land.
No, they did live on the land.
Their ancestors.
No, they still here. You act like they moved out the country, came back. They never left. What happened was they were moved off the land. So, in other words, and then they were moved to another reservation. And then what happened recently, they found oil, and I think Ohio, one of their reservations, they trying to move them off that reservation, their own land. So what I'm saying is, you're not paying them anything. It was theirs first. You came and took it from them. So now, also when you talk about mortgages, when I said mortgages, yeah, you go into a contract. But at the end of the day, ask anybody who owns a home. This is fact. You don't own it officially until you pay the mortgage off. Until then, the bank has the title to the home. You do not have the deed or the title. Just like when you buy a car, the same as you buy a car. You can go buy a car, the car is $3,500. You put the whole 35, what they give you? A title, which is a deed of ownership. But just in the same but now, say like a car costs $30,000, you put $5,000, you never have the title. The dealership has the title. And the same for a home. Say like the house is $100,000, you put $100,000 down. Now you have the title to the house. That shows the deed of ownership. But if you only put $20,000 down and the house is $100,000, you owe $80,000. Who has the title of the deed of ownership? The bank has the title. So there is still the owner of the house. What it is, you put your credit or you put your name down as in obligatory relations where you're going to pay this amount. But until you pay that amount, this is business. You don't own it. In other words, you just...
Yeah. So I have to take a different perspective on the Native Indian thing to everyone here. I don't think this is the best analogous example because back then, before that society, like we base most of our ownership ideas on contractual relationships that have developed more recently. And back then for them, they didn't believe that the land belonged to them or to anyone. They didn't think of this concept of ownership or property rights. So I don't really see the relevance of having this like debate here right now. A lot of what we do is like paying back a historical debt or trying to compensate for what we've done to Native Americans. But I don't think this idea of like land ownership is really relevant when you're talking about like the historical
See, but
aspect
here's
of
the
it.
thing. Y'all keep saying back then. If you do the research, it's happening today. Not back then. I'm talking about today they're fighting for this. It's a battle right now amongst the Native Americans.
But the fact that it's a battle shows that the government can't just take it away. Like if they had no
already
ownership,
moved some of them.
they move some of them, but they're legal battles which show that they have claims and ownership claims to such lands. If there was no debate at all, that would just be the government saying, like, we don't respect your ownership rights at all. If they're losing the battle, you could say, like, perhaps their ownership right claims are weakening. But to say that they don't exist at all, then there would be no legal battle.
How is it my ownership rights? Other words, there should not be a battle if I own it.
I think
When you start to, if I own something and you come in and you impose, that's an imperialistic colonial mentality. That's what they're fighting against: imperialism, colonialism. Other words, a dictatorship. This is my land. Whatever we do on here, there's no debate between us. This is mine. How we debating all about what goes on my property?
Well, that would be the perspective of most defendants' claim, but that's why we have legal battles, because like each side believes rightfully that like there should be no debate to begin with, right? But that's why it's been like drawn out in court. I think like it's a very legitimate perspective to have, but just because like that perspective is right doesn't mean it would not be discussed in a legal setting.
Yeah, this is just an extension of the eminent domain dispute. We all agree that there needs to be some form of eminent domain, right? We need to be able to build roads. If we don't have eminent domain, it's probably going to be impossible to build roads and to build other necessary infrastructure. So I think that this is just an extension of that. Was eminent domain abused? Were the victims duly compensated? But yeah, I don't think that this in any way suggests that Native Americans who live on Indian reservations do not, in fact, have property rights.
And you talked about this idea of how it's like an illusion or a dream. But just because this dream has turned into a nightmare doesn't mean you can't wake up from it and still have the ability to pay back your mortgages and in the end own the place or your house or the land, right? We're not, like, perhaps this is a different discussion in terms of like to what extent do people in general own their land, but to say that there are no property rights whatsoever, like I just don't think that falls on your side.
No, I never said there was no property rights.
Okay.
I said we have to understand the difference between, are we talking about someone who paid their mortgage in full versus someone who has a mortgage? Just like when I used the example of the car. The person who paid the car and got the title, he has a whole different right than the person who making payments. So here's one thing you gotta understand. The person who owns his car in full right, he can get full coverage or he can get liability. But if you have a brand new car and you making payments, you have to get full coverage. So in other words, the rights are even different, and the same for a home. If your house is paid in full, you don't even have to get certain things like that.
But that's an extension of the contracts that you, the voluntary contracts that you enter into. By agreeing to a contract with a bank in order to purchase a car or to purchase a house, the bank has an interest in making sure that that car doesn't get wrecked or the house doesn't burn down.
But why do they have an interest?
Because they were the one, they weren't forced to lend you any money.
No, they have an interest because of what? They own it.
They have an interest because it is a security against the sum that they lent you. They weren't forced to.
They
didn't lend
own
you
it.
anything.
They
Your
didn't
father brought this house, so you inherited the house. Okay. So how did they lend you anything? Whose house is it?
Oh, so you're saying
Whose house is
that's a very specific situation.
No, that's why I say you must separate
but
the two.
there again, that house would not be inhabited but for the but for the credit that the original homeowner had to take onto it. If
He didn't take anything out. He ain't borrowed any money from the bank. He won the money through a lottery. He bought the house.
I don't think he'd have a mortgage.
If you don't have a mortgage, hold on. You may not have a mortgage, but then you still have some type of tax or something to pay. You bought the house, the mortgage in the house. You didn't buy the property. You didn't buy the land. So it's still something you got to pay. So you never own it. You never own it. And I think from this roundabout discussion we done had about ownership, I think somewhere in both of your minds that you realize all that money and all those dances you done in your house thinking that you owned it, you now realize that you do not own it. So I think we won.
Okay, I'm going to have to stop it right there. It was getting heated. I love this last part right here.